Hi, this is Tara Johnson, and welcome to This Is My Story, where we dive deep into the power of storytelling. I'm an author, a speaker, a PK, a wife, a mom, a musician. I usually have the microphone, but during This Is My Story, I turn the storytelling over to you. Whether it's a tale crafted by an author or the stories of how God has transformed lives, we want to learn, laugh, and grow together. Welcome to This Is My Story. I am here with my dear friend, Shadia Hrichi. I always wonder if I'm saying the Hrichi right. It almost sounds like...
Right on.
Okay, good. Because I've heard people say Raichi and Richie, and
I've
I'm
heard,
sure you've been called everything, but it's such a
yes.
beautiful last name and first name. You have a beautiful name, so I always want to say it exactly correctly. What origin is your last name again? I think you've told me
Arabic,
before.
both names.
Arabic.
First and last are Arabic. My father was from Morocco.
Oh, Morocco. I think you did tell me that once. So, wow. And how amazing that God called you in to Bible studies, women's
Yeah.
Bible studies with this beautiful um, Eastern name. And I invited Shadia on to talk about her latest study. She's got some amazing ones. She has Tamar and oh gosh, help me. I
Hagar.
just Yes, Hagar. Hagar's my absolute favorite. Maybe of all the Bible studies I've read. Right now, it's Hagar and Elijah by Priscilla Shire. Those are the two I probably
Yeah.
recommend the most. But she has just an amazing... Rahab is her newest, and Legion. Legion was a great study in there. So Rahab, I'm going to hold it up. It's a brand
Oh,
new release. It just came out, what, a week or two ago?
well, you know what? The books were shipped early from the publisher,
Oh,
like for your copies as an endorser. But the official release date is actually October 31st.
October 31st. So we're
Yeah.
hitting this right before the big reveal, before it goes out into the world. It's absolutely beautiful. Again, you just knocked this one out of the park, and you really excel in finding the little messy stories in the Bible. Sometimes they're the big messy stories
Yeah.
in the Bible. What inspired you to do a deep study on Rahab?
Oh gosh. Well, like so the other studies you mentioned, there are all these messy stories. I love these messy stories in the Bible. And after I wrote, actually, it's interesting. After I wrote Tamar, Judah's daughter-in-law, I actually got an email from Francine Rivers.
Mhm.
And she said to me, I'm not making this up. She said, I don't know what you're planning to write next, but I think you should continue with the women in the lineage. And I
Yes.
was not necessarily going there. Like I wrote the one
Mhm.
on Legion, I wrote Hagar, they're not. But I was like, I love Rahab's story. And
I
she's
do
the
too.
next one in the lineage. So I thought, let's go, let's do this. So yeah, and I love the story.
Yes.
But God, and what's yeah, so that's what inspired me is for her, first of all, her encouragement, of course, just but also it's just another one of those messy stories in the Bible we don't talk about a lot. We just we don't at least just give a lot of attention to or
Right.
dig deep into their stories. And I just love digging deep into these messy stories because God always shows me something I never expected.
Oh, absolutely. What always has struck me about Rahab, and something you brought out so beautifully in the study, is just how incredibly intelligent she was. You wouldn't say book. I mean, most of the women back then couldn't read. Most people couldn't read. They weren't educated the way we are, but just that street smart intelligence
Yeah.
to be able to see what the bigger issue was and act. That's, I think, what I love so much about her. And you brought out that she was living in a wicked city. I couldn't help but think of the parallels between Rahab in Jericho and us today. We are living in our own modern day Jericho and
Absolutely.
Babylon. What do you see as far as the parallels between her world and ours now?
They're far stronger parallels than I ever saw before diving deep into this study. Her the parallels are. I mean, she was a real person who really lived. Like her story is a real story. It's not an allegory. It was real. But she is probably one of the most profound parallels to the body of believers. We're called the bride of Christ.
Hmm.
What we fail to remember sometimes is, especially if you look at through the Old Testament and God's interaction with his people, the Israelites, you know, there was just this constant thread of, you know, your whores, your adulterers,
Yes.
you have forsaken your husband. You know, I mean, it's just, it's from beginning to end.
Yes.
And that's who we are until we come to Christ.
Right.
We are the prostitute. We are the one who's running from God, who's doing everything wrong, and so it's this incredible parallel, um, between, you know, who we are before and after Christ, and Rahab before and after she comes to recognize who God is, and embrace him. Because there's this idea, like, you know, we don't know who God is and then we embrace him. That's true. But the rest of the people in the city, they also recognized who God was.
Mhm.
Rahab's words say everyone here is terrified. You know, she's talking to the Israelite spies. I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but, you know, your God, he parted the sea. He led the people through the Red Sea. He freed them from Egypt. You know, like, they knew, and they were
Right.
terrified. But Rahab's the only one that allowed that fear to cause her to turn, you know, and this is God's grace, of course, drawing her, but opening her eyes, like drawing to him instead of running away from him.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And I
And there's,
love that she didn't seek protection for her possessions or her reputation in the city. It was about her family. That's where her heart
yes,
was. I mean, she knew who she was, and especially in the eyes of this holy, powerful God that she didn't really understand, but she had this amazing respect and reverence for, and to have the love so deep for a family that she was like, please protect my loved ones. I think
it's
so many times people get labeled unfairly. I even think about poor old Thomas. If we were labeled by our most well-known sin,
oh,
how hard would that be to shake? Can we say doubting
I
Thomas?
feel like,
And
I want to put a hood over my head. Like,
I
please,
know.
let's not do that. You know.
I don't want that. Nobody wants to live that way, but we do that so often, even with these beautiful and brave women of faith and men of faith. We tend to label them. I'm like, I don't want to be labeled as the person who doubted, that Jesus was
Right.
alive, and I hate to even think of Rahab as the prostitute, because God completely washed that past away. It just became a scar in her story. I've often heard it said, our the wrinkles in our face just tell a story of where we've been. That her former life was not who she became, and God could see all that, looking through time. So, what was it that you found most surprising in your research when it came down to studying more about Rahab?
I would say, I mean, there were definitely, I mean, a couple of really big surprises. Like, well, first, like if we go back just to the whole prostitute theme, in the book of Revelation, there's the great prostitute, you know,
Right.
and this whole imagery of, basically wickedness at its ultimate full end, you know,
Yes.
and the reality is like, without, you know, given enough time, given enough circumstances, given enough, you know, experiences, without God, all of us would be headed.
Yes.
That's what evil ultimately will look like, you
Right.
know, in us and out through, and so far. And so you have this dramatic contrast, you know, between these two characters. And in the book of Joshua, where Rahab's story appears, there are just these, a significant number. I think there's more than a dozen or 14 or something like that. Very specific, parallel events taking place, and I don't want to give it all away, you know,
Yes.
but it's a very clear, you know, connection between the book of Joshua and, the book of Revelation. Very,
Mhm.
very clear. Not just, oh, there's a prostitute, oh, there's a wicked city. It is far more detailed than that. I mean, you did you get through the last chapter yet, or no?
I did. And that was, I think, what surprised me and endeared me to this Bible study so much, is I didn't ever really see the parallel before, but then you brought it out and I'm like, well, of course, it's right. It's right there. And it was so beautifully done, and makes Rahab's story even more relevant to us today as we're seeing the way that the world is unfolding, whether Jesus tarries his coming for another 50 or 100 years, or if it's just, within a decade, you can see those things unfolding. And yeah, our worlds are very similar despite the time and the culture. A lot
Yeah.
of overlap that's going on there. I think that's what surprised me most in the study, but what I really loved about it.
Yeah, that was even me as the student, even when you go through, seminary, you study everything in the Bible, but you don't, there's not every, you can't do a deep dive into every single book. And so, Joshua was not one of the ones I did a deep dive in. I did do a deep dive in Revelation, but this aspect of the tie-ins to Joshua wasn't a key element of that. But when you get to do that, diving into the deep, it's like, oh wow, God, this is so cool,
This is amazing.
And in addition to that, I think the other big surprise really was just seeing how profoundly significant her story was theologically. And
Right.
we just talked about the highlights between the prostitute and the revelation and so forth, and that's very significant. But actually, that would not make the best case for the theological significance. I feel like that's almost like another piece of it, and that case comes out in the New Testament, where we already know she's listed in the lineage of Christ, but she's when you come to the Hebrews Hall of Faith, you have this whole big kind of litany of the writer is getting your attention to, there was Abraham, and then there was Isaac, and there was Moses, and so if you think about the biblical audience at the time, you always want to keep in mind who's this writer in their humanness, who obviously God's writing through them, but they're still also writing from the perspective of their current audience. So they're
Right.
thinking of the biblical time frame. They're thinking of the Old Testament people and that kind of thing. And so here he is going through all of these Old Testament kind of heroes, and it's almost like he's building up the suspense. We got Abraham, we got Moses, and it's just, and so and then he starts talking about the events of Jericho. He's like, and the walls came down. He doesn't, and so he is setting up the audience to anticipate the hero,
Right.
Joshua.
Right.
And he never mentions Joshua.
No,
It's Rahab.
it's Rahab.
It is so profound that whole segment is built around the suspense of bringing Rahab to that pivot point in the text. Because after Rahab, the author then he doesn't go through any more stories. He's like, I don't even have time to talk about this one and that one and the other one. Like, it was very clearly his aim was to get to Rahab, and so you have that,
Yes.
And then you have this whole and then she's mentioned in the book of James, which is also extremely significant because she's mentioned alongside with Abraham,
Abraham.
like the
Yes.
father of the faith, and Rahab. Like, those are the two people he's going to bring out in is regarding as being commended for their faith. This is just astonishing. And then we can go back to the beginning of the story, of Rahab's story, and consider what was happening at that time. So I know I jump around a lot, but so I wanted to point out, like, just the fact that the New Testament writers recognized Rahab profoundly.
Mm-hmm.
But then you go back to the original story and you're like, well, what was happening? We've got Joshua and the Israelites. Moses has died. Joshua's the new leader. They've been getting to the promised land. Now they're on the edge, literally on the edge. And the only thing between them is the Jordan River. And God puts the whole thing on hold
Mm-hmm.
to tell us all about Rahab.
Yes.
That's pretty powerful. I mean, they've been waiting generations to get to the promised land, and God decides, no, this is important. Like, really? More important than getting to the promised land? Yeah, we're going to spend a whole chapter talking about this prostitute.
Right.
Because it could have just said the spies went in, got the information, and then they came back. They didn't come back to Joshua with anything militarily strategic information to help him. They came back with essentially, the people are scared. That was their report,
Right.
And so it's clear that the spies went in because of God's design. God led them to Rahab's house. God recognized her faith. He brought them in, and all of this. And so we have this whole drama of building up to the bringing them to the promised land. They're on the edge. And now we're going to talk about and tell you the entire story of Rahab.
Yes.
That's significant.
It is significant. And I recently heard a speaker who shall remain nameless. I heard him saying that I would never follow Christianity because they so devalue women. I said, boy, I don't know what Bible you've been reading, but
Yeah.
Jesus was the ultimate who elevated women in that culture and that era and that time from pretty secondary class citizens to just hailing them for their faith and their devotion and their surrender. There is no greater honor to be bestowed on anyone than to be marked in that hall of faith. I can't, and two, knowing that she was a prostitute, they never
And a
shy away from
Canaanite.
that.
I mean, like,
And a Canaanite. She was
wow.
not Israeli at all. And my dad and I often joke about this because he's a pastor, and he said, I wonder what would happen if I did like Jeremiah and buried my dirty drawers in the ground and then wore them to church and said, I have a message from the Lord. How many people would lose their minds over that? He said, I don't know that we would even recognize what that looked like in Bible times in our Western culture, but to be so unaware of, and two, they didn't have internet, they didn't have newspapers, everything was being sent to Jericho word of mouth, like, did
Mhm.
you hear what happened down in Egypt? Did you hear about this? So it really shocked people, and for her to have in her own way been seeking God, even
Yeah.
not really understanding who he was. To me, that's phenomenal. The fact that God would elevate her to that position is just, he's amazing. Like you say, he takes, I think we've talked about this before, he takes nobodies and makes them
Yes.
somebodies,
Yeah.
for him, and what a comfort that is. And I believe you even mentioned that in the study you talked about years before you knew the Lord, you were a cocktail waitress, and that thinking back over that time makes you like, ugh, but
Yeah.
God knew when he called you, he just transformed, and all that is just, it's like it never happened. It's just been
She's
washed
dead.
away. She's dead. She's
She's
gone.
dead, and it is astounding because I mean, like, that's just one highlight.
Yes.
All this stuff. I'm like, like, really, you're you're calling me to teach this stuff? Like, I did everything wrong by the time I was 14. I mean, I know we all did on certain levels and all that, but
Sure.
he definitely gave me some colorful stories to share.
But for people who have been raised all their lives in church and were too scared to venture beyond, we're like, I wish I had a good testimony. Well, the testimony is he saved each of us
Yes.
from hell. He
Yes.
and some of us had easier starts than others, but we all have to come to that place where we realize I am nothing. I am empty. I am useless without you. Take me, transform me. Whatever I have of value is yours. And of course, you and I know we have nothing of value, but he fills us with him. And just, I think of it like a hand in a glove, without that hand inside, that glove's just empty. It's lifeless.
What a
But when that
beautiful
hand goes
picture.
inside, it can do all kinds of things. So, and Rahab is just a beautiful example of that. And a question I had for you is, was it just God leading you through it, or did you know starting this study about the link between the scarlet cord of Rahab and Tamar?
Oh, well, because I had written Tamar prior.
Hmm.
I wrote that one first. I actually do hint about Rahab in Tamar's
Yes.
study because of that link. So I did. But when I was studying the Tamar,
Hmm.
writing Tamar, the fact that the cord, that is used when Tamar gives birth to her twins, the color of the cord is actually called out in the
Yes.
passage as scarlet. And so when I was writing that study, I was like, well, that's
Yes.
interesting, because that's a detail you're not really thinking about. You know what I
Right.
mean? In her story, whereas in Rahab's, we all know about the scarlet cord,
Yes.
right? So
Hanging
it
out of the
was,
window as the
yep,
sign. Yes.
yeah. But then to have written Tamar and then going back and being like, wow, this is just very interesting. Yeah. So
I,
there is,
I love that.
pun intended, a thread going, going through these stories.
Well,
That's
for
indeed.
those who aren't as familiar with the story, do you mind drawing the comparison between Scarlet's or race? I said Scarlet's act of faith, Rahab's act of faith with the scarlet cord, and Tamar's the way it mentions the scarlet cord with her twins. Do you mind
Yeah.
just bringing that out?
It's interesting. So Tamar's Judah's daughter-in-law, and if you want a messy Bible story that's like racy,
That's it.
like PG-15. No, I really do actually say that. Like don't watch my PG-15.
Yes.
At least. And Tamar's story is something. But in her story, so she's impregnated by her father-in-law, Judah, the Judah, Judah, line of Judah,
From the tribe,
and
yeah.
she has twin sons. And as she's giving birth, there's this very bizarre scenario of like a hand comes out from the one twin, the midwife grabs it, ties this scarlet thread on the hand to kind of mark him as the firstborn, but then the hand goes back in and the other one comes out, the other
Yes.
child. It's just like, I'm actually trying to picture this, like, wow, I've never given birth, but like that I don't know, but
I have done that too. Like, how does this
happen? I actually did a little research because that's the kind of nerd I am, and apparently that kind of thing it's rare,
Yes.
but it actually, they get turned around and all the things. I'm like, wow, okay. Well, anyway, enough of that visual. So there's this sort of this pursuing, not I would say conflict or what's the word? Not controversy. I mean, you got this kind of rivalry going on because, like, which one's really the firstborn? Like,
Right.
does a hand count? I don't.
Is it hand? Is it head? Is it feet? What is it? Yeah.
So obviously, the other child, the one who's fully born first, is considered the firstborn. That's Perez. He's the one who's in the line of David and the line of Christ. That's how Tamar gets up in the line of Christ, because it's her child and so forth. But the other son, Zerah, has this red scarlet cord on him. And so it's this picture of redemption. Like, he's
Right.
not the firstborn, but he'll be redeemed. He'll be covered by the blood of the firstborn, which of course is Christ, right? So that's what's going on in that story. And then in the story of Rahab, she is visited by the Israelite spies who find themselves in her house. And she, basically gives this profoundly theologically rich confession of who God is to them. That's in Joshua chapters 2, I think it's verses 9 through 11. But very, very, every word that she says is very significant. Like, your God is the God in the heavens above and the earth below. Like, she's practically quoting Moses, but she's never heard of Moses, Moses' words. It's very theologically significant. But anyway, so she basically bargains with them, like, I saved you. Now, I want you to save me, and my family. And if you think about, like you were pointing out earlier about her family, that's really significant because, right, she could have had a sure escape.
Yes.
When the spies left her house, she could have gone with them and she would have been safe and free and done. But she decided to stay back for the sake of her family. So that's a profound thing right there. But what the spies told her was, put this scarlet cord. So there's a scarlet cord laying around somewhere. It's often mixed up with the rope that was sent out the window, but it would not have been the same thing. And I go through the details in the study on that. But nevertheless, that's the signal. Like, she was told to hang this scarlet cord in the window as a sign, so that when the Israelites do take over the city, they'll recognize her home, and whoever is in her house will be saved. And so again, there's that picture of redemption. That's that thread of redemption. And it goes back to, you can almost picture the Israelite spies in their mind thinking of the Passover and the blood, like put over the doorpost, the sign of the blood. And so that's really where all that symbolism comes from. I was trying to say symbolically and symbolism at the same time. But that's where that's how it all, again, pun intended, ties together. That's how it all ties together.
I know. I halfway expected, there to be like eventually, if you get all these bundled together and sell them, you need to put like a scarlet cord around them and say, here's the 4-pack, the Bible studies.
I'm excited. Yes.
Like, yeah,
Yes.
because it is so beautiful. And that was something I just had not, because I didn't do all the research that you did into it. But when you mentioned it in the study, I'm like, of course, Tamar. And it just totally escaped my mind. But what a beautiful picture that is. It makes me want to hang scarlet cords from all of my windows around the house. Like, just says this is a house of faith.
Yeah.
And that's something too that you just brought out in multiple ways and different angles and facets, is this link between faith and obedience. Faith is not just saying, I believe, but it's also, there's an action that, and I think that's so important even now, as the world gets darker. Faith is not saying I trust God and then hiding in our closet. There has to be action behind it.
I mean, if you think about the New Testament writers, whenever Rahab is mentioned, the other, I would say the other times that she's mentioned, apart from the lineage in Matthew, they're calling out her faith, and they're stating why she's commended for her faith. And it says that, because she hid the spies. And it's
Yes.
just like, it's not because she made this big profession about God. It's not because she saved her family. It's not because she turned her life around. It's she hid the Israelite spies. Like, it seems like a benign thing, but in that act, she was placing her faith in God. Like, I am going to, at the risk of my life, because that's literally what she was doing. She was putting her
Mm-hmm.
life at risk for the king and the king's soldiers who came knocking at her door,
Mm-hmm.
by hiding these men. Her life was on the line,
Yes.
and she sided with God. And so by that act, that was an act of faith, and that's why she's commended for it. It
Yeah.
was actually taking a step of faith that there was no turning back at that point.
Yeah.
She's a traitor at that point, as
Yes.
far as her city and king was concerned.
And it's amazing how God always, I love that verse in Psalm that said, David says, I've never seen God's children forsaken or begging for bread.
Yeah.
He sees our need. Sometimes he doesn't give us an overabundance, but he gives us exactly what we need, exactly for each moment when our strength just falls short. He just steps in and fills it. It's a beautiful study. And I think one of my favorite things, this sounds so silly and small, but to me, it's very significant, is the very last call to action that you have in here, and it's writing my legacy of faith. And you
Mm.
provide several pages to just fill in. Each person gets to fill in their own study, and it starts off with the date, and it says, by faith I trusted in Christ as my savior. By faith I whatever, would I fill in the gap there. But I love that you provide all this space for people. Like, for me, this is a running thing. This is something I'm not just going to put down and say, well, that's done, and put it in my bookshelf. This is something I can go back to over and over again. And even in the times where I just feel like I'm just absolutely faltering and Satan has tried to make my faith wobble like jello, that's something I can go back and easily see with my eyes, to see this is this and this and this and this is what God has led me
Yes.
through. And the list will just keep growing, as time goes
As
on.
long as you have breath, that list will keep on growing. Yeah.
Yes.
And it's
So
it's
beautifully
beautiful.
done.
Oh, thank you.
Beautifully done. So where can people find Rahab whenever it's out in a
Well,
very short
okay, so
amount of time?
here's the fun part. So I'm not sure exactly when this episode is going to go live, but regardless of when you're listening to it, it's available to ship now if you go directly to my website. So
Okay.
I have early copies. So you go to rahabbiblestudy.com. That'll get you right to the website. And otherwise, you could find it just wherever books are sold, once it's released officially on October 31st. But if
So,
you
I
go to
mean,
my website, I'll even sign it for you. So that's fun.
cool. I say that's a good reason to go grab it early. So, and I've got the big money. I've got Shadia's beautiful autograph in there. So,
Oh,
so
oh.
this is absolutely lovely. What's next for you, or do you know yet? Has God revealed that to you yet?
Great question. I am strongly considering continuing with the lineage, and so the next one would be Ruth.
Mm,
And I'll be honest with you, I had kind of wavered on doing a study on Ruth, and I haven't
mhm.
started it yet. We're still. I've got video production coming up for Rahab, so there's still a lot of stuff to go on. But before I
Right.
start that one, but I absolutely love the story of Ruth. By the way, it's my absolute favorite Old Testament book.
Yes.
Um, but I've kind of hesitated because there are some good studies out there. It's like,
Right.
want to do another study on Ruth, but again, I'm not just because it's coming to mind, but it was my friend Francine who pointed out before I had even expressed a hesitancy of writing a study on Ruth, she actually sent in that original email I was telling you about, like, oh, I think you should do the rest of the lineage. And she said, and by the way, I know there's been a lot of studies on Ruth. And I'm like, how did she know that would be? She doesn't know me that well to know that would have been my hesitation. But she went on to say that she's like, you always, find things and that just haven't been explored before. And I think it's, you do a beautiful job, and all those encouraging words from her. But I love the story of Ruth. She is the next one in the lineage. And so that's what I'm leaning towards. But I do have other ideas. So
I've got to stay tuned, don't I?
Get on my newsletter so you'll get the inside scoop.
Oh, that's a great idea. Yeah. I don't know. This is just me. And I like seeing this actually in the margin of my Bible, because it reminds me to this is a reason to keep pursuing God, because we can't know all of who he is in our human minds. Our brains would blow up. But every time I'm reading through the Bible, again, if there's something that just really puzzles me, I just put a big question mark out to it, because that's a sign to me to say, oh, this needs more study. I'm going through 1st and 2nd Kings right now. And my son and I, we each study together in the mornings, but we're in different parts of the Bible. So
I love his quotes that you share.
Oh, like, he's so fun.
You can just take all of your posts of all his quotes that you've ever shared and make like just a little, Nate's
Bible study, because
tips or Nate's thoughts, or I don't know, something. But
he always has God on his mind, which is so much fun. But like last night, my son, or my husband's out of town, and so it's just my son, my middle daughter, and I were eating dinner, and we're chatting about our day. And just out of the blue, I think Callie's talking about homecoming that's upcoming in a few weeks for her. And Nate just said, that Bathsheba, she must have been a hottie. And I said, what? So it just took me off guard. He said, well, for David to mess up as bad as he did, she must have been one real good looking chick. And I said, I guess so. And then he goes, do you think they called her Bathsheba because she was always taking a bath? That's my question. And I said, okay. I don't know. So, the way his mind works is so cute. And it just, but so, I mean, like the other day I was reading through 1st Kings, and there's this very odd, to me, it seems odd, but nothing in God's word is wasted. It's all powerful and significant, but it's this passage where it says a holy man is going to call out one of the kings, but an old prophet stops him and says, why don't you come eat with me? And the holy man says, no, God told me I shouldn't eat with anybody. And so the prophet lies and says, but God told me that you're supposed to come. And so the guy says, okay. And then God ends up killing the holy man. And I'm like, what does this mean? So I always put passages like that, to me, are fascinating. Mm-hmm. And so I have question marks. So maybe someday I'll just hit you with all my question mark passages, and I'll just
that would be fun.
So we could have a study of question marks in the Bible, something. Yes. But I know you're always thinking, several studies out about possibilities. So it's exciting. So sign up for her newsletter. Go to her website, get Rahab, get it autographed. And I just can't wait to see what God does with the study, my friend. Thank you so much.
Oh man, thank you for having me. I always love chatting with you.
It's a blast. Anytime I get to chat with you, I'm happy. You have been listening to Tara Johnson on This Is My Story podcast. To find out more from Tara and stay connected, go to www.tarajohnsonstories.com. That's TARA Johnsonstories.com. Thanks for listening.